Welcome to Health, Wellbeing and Lifestyle, where professionals in the field inform, educate and inspire the community to be healthier and have a balanced lifestyle. Our first guest today is Lifestyle GP Dr Avi Charlton, and we will be talking about whether a low-carb diet is the key to weight loss. Welcome, Dr Avi. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
So, have you had your own personal experience with a low-carb diet?
Interesting you say that. About a few years ago, I started my own lifestyle change. I wanted to lose some fat. I joined a gym and I participated in an 8-week body transformation challenge. I just did it for fun. My personal trainer prescribed me a diet. I had to follow a spreadsheet with so much protein, so much fat and so much carbohydrates, and turns out that was a low-carb diet. After 8 weeks I lost 4 kilos and I was very happy. That's about the fat that I've wanted to lose, and I was so interested in this diet. I dived into the science, I learned a bit, and as a GP I understand what happened to our body. So I learned a bit more, did lots of courses, and I started to use it on my patients. I started to tell my patients that we need to really cut back on carbohydrates if you want to lose weight. The carbohydrates include the sugar, the processed foods, and also the bread, potato, pasta, lots of processed foods that's got sugar in the ingredients. There's actually so many different names of sugar and the marketing try to hide it. It's 56 names of sugar. So you really have to look at the labels and understand what's in the package. So with the low carb diet, we have to really cut back on the carbohydrates and we have to eat much more of meat, eggs, chicken, fish and pork and lamb and veggies. With the vegetables, we need to concentrate on eating above ground vegetables rather than the starchy potatoes, sweet potatoes and pumpkins, all those starchy vegetables. And if we prioritize eating more protein, adding healthy fat to our diet, that is a really low carb diet. We can include a little bit of fruit, especially the berries are low carb fruit, and really stay away from high sugar fruit. If we eat when we're hungry, reducing the amount of snacks that we eat, that will help us to burn our fat that we don't want, and that will help with losing weight. A standard Australian diet or standard American diet is usually 200 to up to 500 grams of carbohydrates a day, especially when you eat cereal and oats and bread and then desserts and sugar and maybe some snacking on some chocolate. So a low carb diet is usually below 50 to 100 gram a day. And there's also variations called ketogenic diet, which is even less, like less than 20 gram of carbohydrates a day. So going on a low carb diet is dramatically reducing your carbohydrate intake, and we can teach our body to not burn the glucose that we eat, and we can start to burn the fat that we want to get rid of. Quite often doing that, we can reduce our bloating, our bowel gets better, and we can reduce our belly fat. We can feel better, feel more energy and feel more vibrant, and we can deal with our day-to-day stresses better.
So with more meat in the diet, I think we sometimes think there'll be an increase in cholesterol levels. Is that the case?
Yeah, a lot of people are worried about eating too much fat, too much meat will increase your total cholesterol. There's actually new science saying that it's not just the total cholesterol that is of worry. It's more the triglyceride, which is the other part in the cholesterol profile, and the good cholesterol, which is the HDL. So some people have heard that about the ratio. So the ratio between the triglyceride and the HDL is much more important and informed us the risk of heart disease, cardiovascular risk, rather than the total cholesterol. So there's new science saying that inflammation is important about increasing your risk of heart attacks, and the total cholesterol might not be as important, and the bad cholesterol might not be so important either. So we really should look at the whole profile, the whole person, to assess the risk of heart attacks.
I see. Very interesting. And do you have any advice for our viewers for them to embark on this journey now of a low-carb diet? Anything they can start today?
Yeah, absolutely. With changing your lifestyle, changing your diet, it's important for your viewers to follow a program or seek help with a professional that is in tune with dealing with the low-carb diet. They can do it gradually, especially with reducing sugar and processed foods. Nobody should be eating too much sugar and processed foods. It's highly inflammatory, it damages your health, and it's highly addictive. So once you start eating a piece of chocolate, you want to eat more chocolate, more sugars. And the next step is eating more protein, more real food, eggs, chicken, fish, meat. And quite often that will improve their health, improve their nutrition. We can add lots of vegetables, above ground vegetables, staying away from too much starchy vegetables. And we can learn to read food labels. Don't eat too much processed foods and chemicals, numbers. And read the really fine prints of the food labels. And doing that, they can follow a program, learn how to improve their life, and quite often losing weight, and people will feel much more energy. They can think better, feel better in themselves, less bloated, reduce the risk of chronic diseases like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and even Alzheimer's disease, cancer, inflammation, aches and pains. So adopting a low-carb diet can have tremendous health benefits. Now lots of studies showing that is the case.
Wow, it sounds incredible. Thank you for all of that information.
Thank you.
If you would like to learn more about a low-carb diet for weight loss and Dr. Avi Charlton, please visit her webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And after the break, we will be back with another interesting guest and another interesting topic.
Stay tuned. After the break, mindset coach Sharee Shefket will be talking about how to recognize the signs of burnout. Welcome back. Our second guest is mindset coach Sharee Shefket, and we'll be discussing how to recognize the signs of burnout. Welcome, Sharee.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
I just want to know, what exactly is burnout?
Burnout is basically a mental and physical exhaustion, and it's usually work-related. So it's because the pressure of the work environment has got to that person, and it's now affecting them mentally and physically. So there's obviously mental and physical symptoms with burnout. So they will have a symptom of apathy. They might be cynical. They will have some physical symptoms, especially if they're working 9 to 5. They might have a really great weekend, and then that Sunday dread will come along, and so they start to feel like, I don't want to go to work tomorrow, because that build up stress in their body is just overwhelming. So they have this also where they just don't care anymore, and it's like they're on autopilot in their work. So they're doing what they have to do, all the tasks, but they're not really present. Like if there's a meeting, for instance, they're just going through the motions of that task. They're not really adding value to their job. And so what happens is that over time, that person don't have any passion left, and they start to feel withdrawn. They might not want to talk to their co-workers. They will maybe more irritable and snap at their co-workers for asking a silly question. But there's also a lot of stigma around burnout. So I'll give you an example as well of how I experienced burnout, and later on in life how I was able to recognize the symptoms. So when I was about 20 years old, I was studying, I was working full time, 2 jobs, the whole bit, trying to, save up as much money as possible. That was my goal. And at the start, I was thriving. I was like, I could do this. I'm young. I've got the energy. I can do it all. But after some time, it obviously caught up with me, and I was literally exhausted. I would sleep and I'd get up and I felt still exhausted. I'm like, well, what is it? Like, why do I feel so tired? And I'm usually a very happy, smiley kind of person, and I just didn't have the energy. I was just doing the bare minimum I had to do because I was just so exhausted. And I recognized that this is just, something's right. I need a rest. So I approached my manager at the time and said, listen, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I'm literally exhausted. I just feel like I need a break. I just need to go do something fun and just get out of here. And I just had this emotional outburst, and that's another symptom. I was uncontrollably crying. I've never done that before, just started crying out of nowhere. But I was just so tired. And after that, I took that break. I made some drastic changes where I decided that money wasn't as important and my self-care was. And I left that position. So that's when I decided that I'm going to now make some changes, because I hadn't experienced burnout yet. I was just recognizing the symptoms, and that's what's really important.
It sounds quite similar to depression. So what is the difference between burnout, depression and stress?
Great question. So let's talk about stress first. So stress can be quite beneficial sometimes. So for example, if you've got a big task to do, like a dinner party, for instance, and you've got a bit of stress happening, it's just excitement a little bit, and it gets you under the pump, and it could be quite useful sometimes. When stress becomes chronic, that can lead to burnout, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Now let's look at depression. Now, depression is a mood disorder. So with depression, it's total apathy, a sense of hopelessness, a lot more physical and mental symptoms happening with depression, and it will seep through all areas of your life. Whereas burnout will be more confined into the workplace. It can also affect your personal life, but not so much. So someone who's, say, experiencing burnout might love their weekend, but they'll have that dread on that Sunday night lead back to work. Where someone who's depressed, it doesn't matter what day it is. And the difference between someone who's experiencing burnout and depression is that chronic stress. So I could take someone who is experiencing burnout and take them to the Greek islands, pamper them all day, have massages, cocktails, have some vitamin D, having that gorgeous weather, and they will start to go back into themselves and feel less stress. That nervous system starts calming down, and you'll say to them, okay, when you come back to work, we've offloaded half your tasks, so you're not going to feel as overwhelmed, and that person will be able to start to enjoy their career again. Not so much with depression. I could take them to the same person to the Greek islands. It doesn't really matter, that mood disorder. But burnout can lead to depression, something that needs to be concerned about, that we don't want that to happen at all.
So what are some tips then to prevent burnout?
The biggest prevention is self-care. When you're in a workplace, you might be allocated an allowance for a therapist, and a lot of workplaces now encourage, because they recognise that burnout is a problem in the workplace. So there are free resources if you have a 9-to-5 type of employment and have access to that therapist, which is fantastic, and I recommend utilising that. And you don't even have to tell your manager because of the stigma. You might just say, I just want to organise this session, and it's usually confidential, which is great in terms of arranging that session. Now, if you're self-employed, obviously you don't have those resources in place, so you can obviously find your own therapist, which is fantastic, but also implement a lot of self-care. What is it that you like to do? Do you connect with people? Are you doing any healthy habits? Are you taking regular breaks? Are you maybe doing some meditation? So have a look and see how much self-care are you doing during the week. Because when you are self-employed, you become a little bit obsessed with your business to recognize the symptoms before it manifests into burnout. Prevention is key.
Thank you so much for your advice on that topic. If you'd like to know more about Sharee and the signs and symptoms of burnout, you can visit Sharee's webpage via our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. After the break, we'll be back with another guest and another interesting conversation.
Stay tuned. After the break, trauma therapist and author Melissa Hiemann will be talking about how trauma shows up in our parenting. Welcome back. Our last guest, Melissa Hiemann, is a trauma therapist and author, and the topic we'll be discussing today is how trauma affects our parenting. Welcome, Melissa.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. So, Melissa, how does trauma affect our parenting?
Yes, so firstly, I'll explain what trauma is. So trauma, and in relation to parenting, is usually ages 0 to 7, where we have a very strong emotional response, where we feel very scared or very stressed out, but we don't have someone safe there with us to help us process that, or we feel like we're trapped and that energy can't move through our body and it gets stuck in our body, and it can cause behaviors, negative thoughts, and flashbacks later in life. It can definitely affect our relationship in regards to that we have with our kids, our relationship with parenting, our relationship with another parent, if we have a partner, because we're taught certain ways of how to be nurturing. We're taught certain ways of how to discipline a child, and we've received it in certain ways. And so that can impact what we do with our children, right? So for example, with me, my mum was left at a boarding school when she was 4 years old. And so she didn't have a lot of nurturing there. And so when she came to having me, it was really about, in that generation, the food is on the table, roof over your head, and there wasn't much emotional support. And she would never sit down and play with me. And so for me personally, as a parent, I forgive her, and I understand that that's just the way that she was brought up. But then when it came to actually playing with my child, I actually found it very difficult, and that nurturing and playful side didn't come out naturally, and I had to really work on that. Another example is, say someone is very strict as a parent and they believe that hitting or that kind of discipline is good, even though they might be alcoholics because they have anxiety all the time and they're always worried about getting in trouble. Even as an adult, they're just like, well, that's the way I was parented. This is how I'm going to parent my kids. And that strictness, the child and the parent lose their bond and their connection and trust. And the kid just learns that I only get attention maybe when I'm doing something naughty. And that can really perpetuate the behavior, and that could be generational. Then when that child becomes a parent, they could believe that the discipline in that way is the right thing to do. And then you can go on the other spectrum where a parent is just very carefree. The child is free range and let to do whatever they want to do. There's no structure, there's no guidance. As a parent should be a guide and a safe connection for that child. And then they might feel like a little bit lost, and they don't fit in anywhere, and they're not connecting with anyone. So there's like a real spectrum there of how trauma can affect us and how the way we were parented can affect how we parent our children.
That makes a lot of sense. How do we be aware of our own personal trauma when we're parenting?
So if you're a parent, you might know how triggering parenting can be. So for example, if your child is having a tantrum, right, and maybe growing up you weren't allowed to cry, you were told to shut up if you cried.
So when that trauma is trapped in your body, you couldn't process those emotions, and those stress hormones are trapped in your body. Now, when your child is having a tantrum and screaming, it's triggering that part of you that wasn't allowed to express itself, and you want to quickly shut down that child because it's so uncomfortable in your body because that trauma is being triggered by your child. So instead of telling the child to shut up and stop crying, we can become a bit more self-aware and think, this is feeling very uncomfortable for me, and just getting curious about that and being there for your child and being really present rather than being really stuck in how you're feeling and perpetuating that generational trauma that could happen if generation after generation they were told, like, shut up, don't cry. So parenting really starts before we become a parent. I know that it starts way back to the partner that you choose, and the partner that you choose is going to have such a significant impact on your nervous system, on your stress levels, on how peaceful you feel, and how conducive that is to having a really nurturing and safe space to bring a child into. So it really starts with, am I attracting the right partner or going for the right partners that are conducive to having a really trauma-aware, conscious parenting environment, a peaceful environment to bring a child into. And then as when you become pregnant, and then at about 3 or 4 months old in the womb, the nervous system of the baby and the child is already scanning the mother's nervous system and the environment to see what they're going to come out into. And trauma can already start there. So even for myself, when I was in the womb, I would have been scanning and seeing, what is my father like? What is the household like? What am I coming into? Oh, my mum feels very alone and unsupported. And I could take that trauma on while I'm growing in her belly. So that's when it can start. And then ages 0 to 7, a child's body, even if they don't consciously remember, remembers every single thing. So when you let your baby cry it out, when you hit a toddler, when these things happen, when a child is watching domestic violence or watching fighting, they're literally absorbing every single thing that is going on and what happens to them or what doesn't happen to them when they're not protected and abuse happens. And that's their blueprint for how they are going to be as an adult. And most of our personality is created ages 0 to 7. So the more traumas that there are, and there's a study called the ACE study where if there's violence in the house, alcoholism, abuse, neglect, the more likely someone is to have obesity issues or health issues, addictions, and issues in their own relationship.
What advice would you have for parents out there to repair their own relationships with their children?
Yeah, so when we explain all of this information, they become aware it can bring up a lot of guilt and shame of perhaps how we've caused our children trauma. But the great news is there's neuroplasticity, which means that we can heal our relationship with our children. We can say sorry to our children, even if we thought we were doing the best that we could, which we definitely were. And we can start to repair that bond that we have by creating positive events, creating positive memories, holding space for our children's emotions, holding space for our own emotions firstly, so we can hold space for others. So we can start to break the generational cycles and the perpetuating traumas that are getting passed down in our DNA, in our environment, in our families. It's never too late. And the first step is, working with someone yourself and releasing that guilt, that shame, and healing your traumas, and you will naturally evolve and be able to heal that relationship with your child.
Thanks, Melissa. That's such valuable information. If you'd like to know more about Melissa Hiemann and how trauma shows up in our parenting, go to her webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And that's all for us for today. We'll say bye-bye until next time. If you'd like to know more about our show, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.